I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
These days, we're all investors, trying to be smart with our money despite our worst impulses. But at iShares, we believe that deep down inside of every investor is a better investor. One that's just waiting to be let out. Explore iShares ETFs and insights and let your best investor out. Visit iShares.com for more information.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
Part 1, we discussed, is the world getting stupider? And we also discussed how to make a video viral. What are the key components? And we talk about that a little bit more in this episode, but the focus of this episode is his book, What the F Does the Constitution Say? Here's Ben Sheehan. Starting with the First Amendment, it seems like even there's so much controversy around each amendment, but like the First Amendment, freedom of speech, I think nobody really knows what that means. Because there was all this argument about like, oh, why can this person say this thing on Twitter and this person can't, and blah, blah, blah. Like, obviously it means, okay, freedom of speech if you're standing on publicly held land, I guess. But what is freedom of speech?
Freedom of speech is actually the First Amendment can best be understood by the very first word of the amendment, which is Congress. It says that Congress cannot pass a law to restrict freedom of speech, to create a religion that you have to join, to ban a religion, to prevent free press, to prevent people from assembling peaceably, to prevent people from protesting, which they called, petitioning the government for a redress of grievances. This all has to do with Congress not being able to make a law to restrict our freedom of speech. So Twitter is not Congress. Twitter is a private company. It's not even a government entity, so they can do whatever they want. If they wanted to, ban everyone talking about, oranges being better than apples, and that was something that they wanted to enforce on their platform, they could. It seems like a stupid thing, but like, it's a private company. It's not bound to the First Amendment. So this whole idea, it's a testament to the fact that we think of Twitter as being so powerful. It's almost like a branch of Congress, or it's just such a powerful entity. We feel like they. It would be infringing our rights for them to restrict speech, but they have every right to restrict the speech that's on their platform. They're a private company; it's their platform. If same way that a restaurant doesn't want wants to have you wear masks, they can do that. They're a private company. I mean, this is all sort of silly when you realize that this First Amendment is very specifically talking about what Congress can and can't do.
Well, what about like a town hall, or a local municipal town hall, or a town square? I mean, so I'm on land owned by my municipality, can the mayor say there's no talking about this in the town square?
So that's a really good question, and that has to do with, there may be certain states that have laws. There may be certain, municipalities that have speech laws, but I think the Supreme Court would uphold the sort of central fact that even though they are specifically talking about Congress, it sort of extends to governments in general. And that would be up to the court. If it was a specific example about what you can and can't say, that would be a court's decision. But, Congress is generally understood to be, Congress can't pass a law, but also we think that in the spirit of this amendment, the government specifically cannot restrict, your speech except for in very, kind of sort of granular circumstances. A couple carve-outs that they've had are, things like you can't, shout fire in a crowded theater. You can't directly incite and inspire violence, libel, slander, child pornography. These are all expressions of speech that have been found to be okay to be restricted by the government and still be in congruity with the First Amendment.
Right. So it's an interesting question because if there is really freedom of speech, how do you decide where that line is? Okay, but except for libel, except for slander, except for encouraging people to rebel, encouraging people to do violence. And I guess it's a tricky thing because that line could be drawn in different places in different areas of our history.
Well, it's the Supreme Court's job to say what the Constitution means and what the law means. So the Supreme Court has, decided First Amendment cases for hundreds of years, and this is their job to say, what is and isn't permissible in the spirit of the Constitution.
And then moving on to the Fifth Amendment, that's the Fifth Amendment is probably the one that's most mentioned on TV. Like people are on court and they take the Fifth, and so that means you don't have to testify. You can refuse to answer questions that could be testifying against yourself. And but how is that related to the Miranda rights? So I guess the Miranda rights is the police say you have the right to say or do, or no, anything you say or do can be held against you. Right.
So you're talking, yeah. I mean that they're sort of similar. I mean you can't you basically can't. It has to do with like collecting evidence, and I'm not a criminal lawyer, so I think there would be criminal lawyers who can definitely provide better examples. But in the spirit of why we have the Bill of Rights, this is again to protect you as an individual from a totalitarian government. So you can't, in the original Constitution, you can't have post ex facto laws, which means you can't arrest somebody for something that isn't a crime, or make it a crime and then charge them with that. That's illegal. You can't have bill of attainders, basically locking people up and putting them away without holding a trial. So all of these protections in the Fifth Amendment, in the Fourth Amendment, in the entire Bill of Rights are meant to protect us from, a totalitarian government. So one that could, through law enforcement, take away our rights, restrict our movements, lock us up without a fair trial, without due process. That's a huge one. A part of the Fifth Amendment is that you can't be denied your life, liberty, or property without, due process of federal law. And this all goes back to the central tenet of the Bill of Rights is that, yes, we are strengthening the power of the government under the Constitution. It's stronger, it's more cohesive than it was under the Articles of Confederation, but that doesn't mean we are going to lose our individual rights, which is the whole reason, we kind of wanted to start this country in the first place.
So yeah, you can't be deprived of property or the ability to make a living without due process. What about like in this past year? And I'm not saying an opinion either way, but I'm curious with all of the business shutdowns and 55 million people went unemployed. Many business owners, lost their generational family businesses. Was that unconstitutional in some way to force these businesses to? I mean, it was in some cases over a year. These businesses had to be shut down.
So it creates a really sort of strange, interesting, and sad situation where we're talking about people's liberty being pitted against somebody else's life. and your liberty and your property, your ability to run a business, but just the sheer proximity to other people jeopardizes somebody's life. And this is also the sort of conflict that we see with mask mandates, right? Somebody's liberty to wear a mask or not, wear a mask, being intertwined with somebody's life. Because if you are spreading the disease, even if you're not getting sick, you could give it to somebody who gets really, really sick. So, in your decision to get vaccinated is not purely an individual decision, because if you are not vaccinated, you are a host that the virus could, infect and mutate and have variants that then are, stronger than the current vaccines that we have. So the intertwining of where your liberty infringes on somebody else's, right to live is a complex question. And that is what's at the heart of the business situations that you just explained. It's what's at the heart of our mask mandates. And if you were to really just look at those three words on paper, life, liberty, and property, I think they are, listed in that order for a reason. You have a right to life before you have a right to liberty, before you have a right to property. That's just my own personal interpretation of it, but
No, that's the best explanation I've heard. So you're right. They're probably put in that order for a reason. I wonder, like, I was just reading, and again, I'm not, I'm trying to ask the questions that's on people's minds without necessarily saying do this or do that. But like, I was just reading this morning about this coach, I guess, at some community college in Washington State, who, since she was a child, she got seizures and anaphylactic reactions from vaccines. She had all the vaccines you're supposed to have before she entered preschool, and she got massively sick, and she consulted. So more recently, she consulted allergists and doctors about what she should do, and they advised her not to take the vaccine. I'm not saying people shouldn't take the vaccine, or they should. I'm just saying this person would get sick, apparently. And so she offered all these concessions, like she would get tested for COVID 3 times a week. She would wear a more fitted, professional, like N95 mask. She would do all these things to kind of overcome the fact that she couldn't get vaccinated. But they fired her because they just decided not to give any exceptions, which was their right to do. I'm just wondering about situations like that, and somehow or other, it felt like her rights were infringed upon, even though she was a good employee and willing to offer all sorts of concessions. I guess they figured if they gave her an exception, they'd have to maybe give other exceptions, and they didn't want to do that. I don't know really the full story.
Well, there are always going to be a handful of exceptions to the rule. And so what it sounds like is that there's something in the vaccine that, given her condition, could be life-threatening to her. And so they didn't want to take that. She didn't want to take that risk because she has a right to life. And so, the sad thing is she'd have to do everything she can. She'd probably have to just stay at home all the time and quarantine and work remotely and try to not, interact with people. I often think about, if you live by yourself in a cabin in the woods and you don't come into contact with anybody at all whatsoever, and you don't ever go into big cities or crowded places, like, I don't really care if you don't get the vaccine at that point, because you're not, if you are removed from society and always removed from society and don't come into contact with people, then you're not going to spread the disease. But if you are somebody who is a member of society, you live in a city, you live in a town with, a significant number of people that are at a close proximity, you are threatening my life by not getting vaccinated. I understand that you think that it is not, it is an infringement of your liberty to be forced to get the vaccine, but because you not getting the vaccine does threaten other people's lives, it's not cut and dry. Life, liberty, and property don't have clean cuts between them. There are parts where they overlap, and that's why it's up to, the Supreme Court to ultimately make the decision where one ends and the other begins.
Yeah, and I guess in this case, maybe the college or the state or whatever wanted to just have it be very simple. You either do this or you're not employed. Even though she had weird, seizures or whatever, if she gets vaccines, I guess they decided to be consistent.
Well, I'll just add that for anybody listening, if you want to have an opinion on this from somebody who has both had COVID and had the vaccine, I vastly prefer the vaccine. I've had COVID complications for 18 months now. I got it back in March 2020. I'm one of the long haulers. And so I can tell you right now, it is get the vaccine, deal with the issues, if they're temporary, that come with it. But it is a lot better than having to deal with long COVID, because that is way worse. And I'm one of the lucky ones that survived.
Wow, you had it in March 2020. You must have been flipping out.
I was pretty frightened. Yeah, I had it in March 2020, March to April 2020.
How badly did you have it? Did you go to the hospital?
I went to the hospital, but I was only there for a few hours. I didn't need to get intubated or anything. I was having trouble breathing, but I had loss of taste. I had shortness of breath, chest tightness. I basically hard to breathe for 10 days or so. That was probably the scariest part of it. But I still have tinnitus in my left ear that I never had before I was sick, and so I have to deal with that and mask it with noises at night and take supplements. I have to do, I have insomnia issues that I have now that I didn't have before. So it definitely, and fatigue issues. So again, for anyone listening, if you're given the choice between getting COVID and getting the vaccine, even if you have a mild case, you don't know if it is going to lead to long-term complications, because you don't have to have a severe case to then have long-term complications. In long haul, you can have a mild to moderate case like I did and have long-term complications. So make it way easier for yourself and just get vaccinated.
I also have had it, and for me, I would say I had a really bad case. I wasn't on a ventilator or anything, although my wife spent about 5 days in the hospital, and she had a very low pulse ox reading. But I had such extreme pain 24 hours a day, and it's not like a cold. It doesn't go away in 2 days or 3 days. It was 3 weeks of nonstop pain, and I was not vaccinated. And everybody wrote me and said, "Oh, did you get vaccinated?" And they thought I had a political reason for not being vaccinated. But not everything people do, and I've said this on the podcast before, so for listeners, I'm sorry if I'm boring you. Not everything has a political reason. I was just either stupid or lazy or both. A friend of mine, I kept promising him, "Oh, I'm going to get vaccinated. I'm going to make an appointment." But I was like your guy in the log cabin in the woods. I hardly ever left my house, and I would make appointments, and then I would just get lazy. I wouldn't go. And I kept intending to go, and then suddenly I got COVID, and it was just miserable. So anything that could have relieved that experience. I don't have long COVID at all, although my wife doesn't have her sense of smell back yet, which is good for me. I don't have to bathe as much. But other than that, I'm fine now, but I really wish I had not gotten it. It was extreme. It was the worst sickness I have ever gotten. And so, I mean, I don't know. I don't really know the science or technology or anything, but I wish I had done anything, including vaccine, to have prevented what happened. But I always wonder though about like this Walla Walla person. That's the community college she's from, who seemed to have a lot of people are doing religious exceptions, but a lot of that's BS. But she seems to have a legit thing, and her ability to make a living seems to be deprived. But I agree with you. There's a fuzzy line there. I mean, no document should be read 100% literally. You have to also use, common sense. And this is on every issue, not just on one issue. Now, but this also reminds me, Roe versus Wade. This is the pro-choice versus pro-life kind of landmark Supreme Court case that ultimately allows for abortion. I kind of wish that they had made an amendment specifically about abortion, because the way Roe versus Wade is constructed is that it's about your right to privacy. And so I don't really understand what Roe versus Wade is versus the Constitution. I wish they said there was an amendment here. You're allowed to have an abortion up until such and such time, whatever everybody decides, instead of this weird law that everybody's contesting every year.
So, well, I think if 55, white dudes in the 1780s had the foresight to put in an amendment about abortion, I'd be pretty stunned. I don't think this was top of mind for them. But where the court in Roe versus Wade found the constitutional right, in their interpretation to have an abortion comes from people's right to, in the 14th Amendment to, like I mentioned, life, liberty, and property. And the idea that you can't have those things be denied without due process of the law, the court has said that if that's the case, then fundamentally the founders thought that we all have the right to life, liberty, and property. Like that is just something we should be able to have. And so that's called substantive due process, that we have those rights. So privacy is found under the liberty section. So, having a right to privacy falls under liberty. And since, from substantive due process, we all have the right to liberty. So it's sort of like a subsection of that. I personally think that maybe a better argument would have been made, and one of the Supreme Court justices, I don't know which one, I believe it was in Roe versus Wade, it was either Roe v. Wade or Planned Parenthood versus Casey, I think it was Roe v. Wade, said that a stronger constitutional argument would be to say that the right to have an abortion is one of the rights that falls under the Ninth Amendment, which says that, James Madison had the foresight to say, not all of our individual rights are in here, we may have forgotten some, and what is in the Constitution can't be used to deny the rights that we forgot to include or that aren't in here. I think it's probably maybe it's a vaguer argument, so they were a little nervous about that, but I think it is a cleaner constitutional argument to say that, a right to an abortion is one of the rights that can't be denied by what's in the Constitution that we do have under the Ninth Amendment.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder if that would have been more contested. You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team or I can pick my favorite players and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So, I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy. The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get 2 memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply.
And so here's a question then. So obviously, state by state, everybody's making their own laws about abortion and other things. Do state constitutions somehow supersede or do not supersede the federal constitution?
So when the federal constitution is supreme over state constitutions. So specifically, if it is in the Constitution and it's mentioned as a federal power, or it is not, or it is in the Constitution and it says the states can't do this, doesn't matter what your state law is, like that, the Constitution trumps it. But anything that doesn't fall in those categories is up to states and local governments. So theoretically, states and local governments have infinite power, because if they're only, restricted by what the federal government specifically can do, because the federal government's power is only restricted to what's in the Constitution, and what, and bound by what states can't do. If the Constitution doesn't say, hey, if you're a state, you can't do this, everything else is up to you guys. And one good example of that is education. There's nothing about education in the Constitution. You can, fund education through the federal government under the ability of Congress to raise taxes and fund, the common defense and general welfare. So education falls under our general welfare, but there's no specific educational power that the federal government has. So to answer your question, states, if their constitutions are directly at odds with what is in the federal constitution, that would be unconstitutional. But if it's not mentioned in the Constitution, whatever, it can be in a state constitution.
I see. So, and then it could potentially, someone could sue, and it could potentially get up to the Supreme Court, and they could decide, they basically, essentially they extend the Constitution when they decide something's unconstitutional.
Right. That's exactly right. That's a great way of that's a good verb, extending it. But I think what a lot of states are doing with abortion specifically is that they're trying to pass laws that they're pretty aware are unconstitutional under the current reading of the law and based on Supreme Court precedents. So what they're trying to do is get sued, and they're trying to get that challenge floated up to the Supreme Court to look at Roe v. Wade, and that is happening this term. The Supreme Court is taking a look at abortion challenge. I believe it's a Mississippi law, and is going to rule on that by June. So there is a possibility that Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey could be revised. And,
what do you think will happen?
I find it. If there was no blowback whatsoever, I think that there are clearly more opponents of abortion on the court. And I think that if they weren't worried about how the Supreme Court would be perceived or the backlash that would happen, they probably would overturn it. But I'm sure they're going to find some way to kind of basically not explicitly overturn it, but take all the power away. And it's kind of find a workaround, kind of in the way that the Texas law, the Supreme Court ruled on the Texas law and said, well, it's not the state that's enforcing it. It's not the government that's enforcing it. It is random citizens have the ability to sue people for $10,000 if they think they've been involved in an abortion. That's not the state, enforcing the law.
Hear that.
So Texas basically passed a law, this legislative session that allows private. It's the most restrictive abortion law in the country. It bans abortions after 6 weeks, and it says that anybody who's suspected of taking part in an abortion or facilitating one, down to the Uber or Lyft driver that took somebody to the clinic, they could be sued by anybody in Texas, any resident of Texas, for $10,000. And so what you're doing is you're not outlawing abortion in that sense, but you are basically deputizing private individuals to use the law to, threaten somebody's financial livelihood.
So there's no intent. You might not know anything, but you could still have to pay another citizen $10,000.
Yeah, I mean that would be up to the courts to decide, but it does open it creates a really scary environment where you have people using their I guess civil being able to bring a civil case against somebody if they think they've been suspected of an abortion. But what you're doing is you're getting abortion clinics to close because of obviously the financial threat is gigantic. And so that's one way to get, clinics to close, and to basically, individual doctors would be afraid of their own livelihood if people found out. So it is one way to create the desired effect without using the actual state as the enforcer of the law. So
let me ask you a stupid question because it's related to all this. Do you think everybody actually should have a right to vote? And I'm not talking about defining it by demographics, but maybe people should have some sense of the law or what the Constitution says, or some knowledge of the biography of who they're voting for. And, I don't know, pass a test of some sort. And I know that's usually been a taboo because of racial reasons, but just like blanket, it seems like everybody on Twitter should not have the right to vote. Something like that.
My answer to this would be simple. While I do want schools, I'm in favor of every state and every school board in the country mandating 3 full years of civics education, mandating the taking of a civics exam in order to pass high school, in order to graduate high school. What I think makes the most sense is if you pay taxes in this country, you get the right to vote. Full stop. If you pay federal taxes, you get the ability to just help decide what that money gets spent on. That's kind of why we, wanted to have a country in the first place. We were against taxation without representation. To me, it's not any more complicated than that. If you pay federal taxes, you should have a say in how the money gets spent.
I guess I agree, because almost any other alternative is too complicated. And you're right. That is the slogan for the American Revolution, why we're independent, which I guess begs the question too. Do you think we should have had an American Revolution? Because like England freed the slaves before we did, and in many ways has a better, they don't have a president who spends $2 billion being elected. Their parliamentary system doesn't seem that bad, and it seems less, and it allows for more than 2 parties. There are coalitions of parties. It seems like we put ourselves through a lot of trouble and killed a lot of people in order to end up at roughly the same place, if not a little worse, just by being independent from England. And we're such allies with England anyway. What does it really matter at this point?
Well, it's definitely an interesting idea. I think what's unique to the United States is that our democracy, our Constitution has lasted longer than any other functioning constitution in the world. Like, we literally have the oldest national governing document of any country in existence. And we were one of the first countries to have democracy and basically give power not centralized to a single monarch, but to a bunch of people to vote on. And yeah, there were restrictions on who could vote in the beginning, and there have been for the entire history of this country. But we kind of forget that was a pretty radical idea back in the 1780s to allow just people to have the power rather than unelected leaders. So, do I think that it would have been better 200 years later to still be a part of England? I think there's no way to answer that question. What I do think is that there are some things that we could learn from England, and we can look at what has made our country worse since its inception, or really just in the last few years. I think a lot of the things that you just mentioned happened in the last 2 decades. I mean, things like Citizens United being a huge one, to have this ability to just spend unlimited amounts of money opposing or supporting a candidate is not fair. I find that insane that we have that ability in the country to affect elections like that. A two-party system is completely toxic and corrosive, and leads to basically just perpetual gridlock, not in the seeking of a solution, but to continue to enrich people on either side, whether it's consultants and ad makers and people who just sort of work in the political duopoly industrial complex. So there are a lot of things I would like to borrow. Those things take large efforts to change. Large systemic change can only happen if everybody is educated, if everybody is aware of how things work. And so that's another huge reason why I wrote these books. Because if we want to do the things that you just suggested, we have to know how to pull the levers.
Like, if you could pass one amendment right now, what would it be to improve things?
Publicly funded elections.
What does that mean?
So basically not allow private citizens to fund elections, and basically have, a portion of our tax dollars go equally to every candidate, and then they have to make their case that way.
But like, for instance, anybody can run for president. So like, I actually went to the FEC. It took me 5 minutes. I filled out the paperwork. I'm technically running for president in 2024. So does that mean I would get an equal portion of public funds?
I think it depends on like how maybe you could tether it to how you do in certain stages of the primary or certain poll numbers. I think there's ways to do it where you don't have just everybody in the United States running for president and then being able to get like a stipend from the federal government for their campaign. Like, you'd have to meet certain thresholds, established in order to accept that money. So but like, here's a good example, right? Seattle right now, in their municipal elections, they do this thing called democracy dollars, where every resident of the city of Seattle gets $100. And you can spend it however you want. If you want to give all 100 to the candidate for mayor, you can give it to the mayor. If you want to do 50 to your city council member and 50 to your mayor, you can do it that way. But by taking away the ultra wealthy's ability to just dictate everything in our government, by disconnecting wealth and the ability to run a campaign, I think you would see a radical change in this country. That's if I could only do one amendment. I think that's the one I do. So
how do the wealthy get around it right now? Because there is some limit, right? It's like $5,000 that you could, the max you could donate to a candidate.
Well, there's the difference between hard money and soft money. So hard money is if you're running for president, I can directly give you, I think next time it'll either be $2,900 or $3,000 in the primary, $3,000 in the general. So, $5,800 to $6,000 is the limit I can give you for the entire campaign. But that's not including the money that I can give to PACs. If I give I can give federal PAC, I think $5,000 in the primary and $5,000 during the general, so $10,000. But where the lid really, and then parties, you can give way higher limits to parties. You can give like a couple $100,000 to the
really?
RNC or the DNC. Yeah, so like that's why the big ticket fundraisers are always money going to the DNC or the RNC. That's again another reason political parties are atrocious, have become atrocious, horrible institutions that are purely about money. But I think the thing you're really talking about is super PACs, where super PACs are not legally allowed to coordinate with a candidate or campaign, but they can raise and spend unlimited amounts of money advocating for or against a candidate or advocating for or against a political party. But they
Yeah,
cannot.
why is that legal? That's like seems ridiculous.
The Supreme Court said in 2010, Citizens United a case, that it counts as free speech. Corporations have the ability to have free speech, so they can spend unlimited money, expressing their opinion. But the problem is that these opinions look very similar to normal campaign ads. And if you see these as ads on Facebook or ads on Instagram or ads on TV, there's a little disclaimer at the end, but the average citizen is not going to be able to say like, oh yeah, that was a super PAC ad. Oh yeah, that was a presidential campaign directly paying for their ad. The speech looks very similar to that financed by the actual campaign or candidate. So it's a huge problem. It is corrosive. It also, I think, is responsible for a significant amount of disinformation and misinformation around election time. And it basically gives political power to whoever has the most money.
I have one idea for an amendment that I think would be very useful, which is that any member of Congress, every vote for Congress, they have to make it while physically in their district. So they can't go to DC. They have to, if you're a congressman from, some district in the state of Oregon, you have to be in your district. And the reason for this is that it makes it harder for lobbyists to wine and dine you.
Honestly, that is a brilliant idea. And
thank you very much.
I think you should talk about that more often. I mean, it sort of negates the whole reason we have people in that's really fun. That's really interesting.
The whole reason there's a Washington, D.C., like there's a capital where they all go is because in 1787, it would take months to get to...
Well, you didn't have phones, you didn't have Zoom, so you couldn't, have a vote. I think that's a really interesting idea. You should use every power that you have to promote that. That's really cool.
All right, I will. I'm going to do it. I'm going to form my own super PAC just supporting that idea. So, oh my God, WTF does the Constitution actually say? A non-boring guide to how our democracy is supposed to work by Ben Sheehan. And what does the Constitution say? A kid's guide to how our democracy works, also by Ben Sheehan. Great books. Are people responding to it? Like, are people saying, man, I didn't know the Constitution before and now I know it?
Yeah, I'm getting a lot of really positive responses from the adult book. I had a lot of people reaching out to me, asking me questions, telling me that they finally understood their country, that they really were more engaged and could follow the news better. And I also have gotten messages from parents telling me that their kids stayed up all night reading the book and woke up early the next day. And so it really just goes to show you the information that I'm presenting isn't new. It's always been there. But I think it's just for every generation, you just have to update the presentation and the tone and the style of communication. And by doing that, I think you're going to have a lot more resonance and the information will stick rather than relying on outdated dialect or modes of communication from past generations that may have worked but aren't working as well today.
There's probably a lot of issues like that. So there's the Constitution, maybe religious thought, for different religions, so kids don't get it. Kids get taught religion when they're in 6 years old, 7 years old, 8 years old, and then they don't get taught it anymore. And again, I'm not advocating for any particular philosophy, but just adults think about religion the same way that as they thought about it when they were little kids, and thought and philosophy are a lot more sophisticated than that. And I wonder what other issues there are like that. I don't know. History in general, I guess, hardly ever gets updated.
Well, it's funny that when I was writing the original book, I saw a book that was kind of similar called Your Rugged Constitution that was written in 1950, and every pronoun was he, and it was the illustrations were ridiculous, and it was very clearly this sort of patriarchy dominated, men are the politicians, the women help out in the kitchen type vibe. And people were still using that book today to teach people about the Constitution. So again, it's really just communication is the key to getting information across. So it's just however you are best, not just me, but anyone, however they feel most comfortable to communicate, and just authenticity and speaking to people on the level versus, talking down to them. It's just, it makes the information way more accessible and interesting.
Maybe you should do a series WTF, what the fuck was the Civil War all about? What the fuck was World War II all about? What the fuck is impeachment? Stuff
Kind
like
of
that.
kind of like For Dummies, right?
Yeah. I think you should do
Yeah, I
that.
mean, I'm going to be more active. I have a project that I can't announce yet, but I'm getting ready to announce in the coming weeks that I'm really excited about, and so I'm going to be a lot more active on social media and probably especially TikTok to do stuff like that, kind of like 1 minute breakdowns.
Oh my God, I can't wait. So you'll have to tell us when you do that, and we'll link to it. And also, I know you addressed this before about the Funny or Die stuff. When I asked you, you mentioned this is what makes a video shareable. So you said if you have an extreme political viewpoint one way or the other, or if you do something that's a big surprise. What other tips to shareability do you have for people? So everybody wants their writing, their videos, their TikTok videos, their blog posts, their podcasts. Everybody wants to be shareable. So what are like the top 10 tips for that?
Well, I would say it's not sharing extreme points of view. It's sharing something that you really agree with or you really disagree with, that you think other people will have an opinion about. So yeah, one way to do that is to share like a really extreme perception. But if somebody is like, if the Ravens win the Super Bowl and like you're posting about that and you're saying like the Ravens are the best team of all time, people are going to either agree with that or disagree with that if you're a fan of a different football team. So it doesn't have to be like extremist content to get a reaction out of somebody or to get engagement. But the surprise thing, I think, is always exciting because people always also like to be the first person to like introduce their friends to something cool or new or surprising. So I think that catching people off guard is a really good way to get their attention, to want them to share, this cool thing that they saw. But I also think that sharing and posting about what is really exciting to you is important. If I was doing a book about, gardening or, woodworking, like these are things that I think are, cool. I like looking at gardens. I like looking at well-constructed pieces of wood, but I don't have a passion for either one. And that passion is not going to convey if I was to do a series about either one. I grew up around government. I have soaked this in from a very young age. I studied it. I find this stuff interesting, and I find it interesting to like make it accessible and understandable for people. I like that challenge, and I think that passion comes through in my work. So I would say, like, if you were trying to build an audience for something, talk about what you most enjoy talking about, because you can't fake the passion that comes through when you are excited about something and sharing that knowledge with people.
I like that. All right. Well, Ben, thanks so much for coming on the podcast and explaining all this and answering my totally naive questions about the Constitution and U.S. history. Come on again anytime you want. When you have these TikTok videos or the next thing you're working on, come on and tell us about it. So thanks once again.
I would like that, James. Thank you for having me.
The McNugget Buddies are back. But this time, they got a fresh look as part of the new Kerwin Frost box at McDonald's. We're talking all new buddies, dressed head to toe in the freshest fits, all designed by the artist Kerwin Frost. So when you order the Kerwin Frost box with your choice of 10-piece McNuggets or a Big Mac, you'll get one of the flyest McNugget Buddies to go with it. Think you can collect them all? Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. I'm loving it.
At participating McDonald's for a limited time while supplies last.